And now we're joined by Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and former deputy Israeli minister and parliament member, and from the U.S., Eric Mandel, founder and director of Middle East Political Information Network and senior editor for Security, the Jerusalem Report, joining us from New York. Michael Oren, I'll start with you. How long can Israel rely on having American full support, as we've seen it since October 7th, both diplomatically and defensively?
Good to be with you. The key word there is full. It can count on American support. Full as it existed on October 7th, October 8th, I think is very much in question. This procession of high-ranking American officials who were here, the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff of the U.S. military, all said the same thing. We don't have a stopwatch. We're not telling Israel how to conduct the war. We're not telling Israel when it has to stop this war. But one does get the sense that somewhere in mid-January, when the race for the presidency really gets going for 2024, and these protests continue to mount, and the statistics keep on coming out about this Generation Z, which are a very important block of voters, particularly in swing states like Michigan, that's going to have an impact. And increasingly, you're going to see, if not publicly, certainly behind the scenes, you're going to hear people saying, okay, when are you going to start winding it down?
And then what?
And then Israel's going to have to say, well, we can't. Simple as that. We can't. We cannot let Hamas survive this, because Hamas has said that it's going to regroup and rearm and mount the next attack. We're still going to have hostages in there. We can try to be more surgical in our approach, more this new phase that Secretary Blinken was talking about. They want to make it more surgical. But that's going to be very difficult, Yoav, if Hamas moves to a strategy of suicide bombers, and I've heard this could be a very real possibility. Suicide bombers are going to be coming at our troops wearing, explosive vests. How is Israel supposed to react surgically in that? This is not a play that can be choreographed, that can be storied out and scripted out. Every day could bring different challenges.
Eric Mandel, on the other side of the Atlantic, how does it look from there?
Well, I just came back this morning from Israel. America is not the same America that it was not that long ago. The rise of anti-Semitism has been seemingly exponential. But this didn't all start on October 7th. I've been speaking on campuses for the last 20 years, and people just were not paying attention to the rise. And first it was with millennials and now Gen Z, who see 64% of Gen Zs see not Israel, but Jews as oppressors. Classic anti-Semitism, majority of Gen Z. The question really is, we are going to a political season. There is going to be pressure on President Biden from his political advisors to wind down this war. From everything I saw, I was in the north, I was in the south. There's an active war in the north. The south, Israel needs many months to dismantle the tunnel network. America has a short leash, I think, starting in 2024. But I do have to stop and thank my president for what he has done and has given Israel as much leeway at this point as possible. But I think there's going to be real problems going in the future, both in the short and in the long term.
So let's speak about the short term. Israel probably wants more time, more international support, Eric, meaning mainly vetoing the resolutions in the Security Council, and more ammunition. Will it receive all that list?
Right. So actually, that was my piece in the Jerusalem Post this week.
Sorry.
No, that was will the next president in the United States, if it's a Democrat, or if something happened to President Biden, it was President Harris, not continue to supply ammunition to Israel, even if Israel believes in its mortal danger, that this is an existential crisis. I would not count on the next president, if it's a Democrat, to be perfectly honest, to be like President Biden. And by the way, on the other side, there are isolationist instincts in the Republican Party, and there'll be deficit hawks in the future. We'll say we have to cut foreign aid, which has to open up the possibilities. I know in the fog of war right now, everybody is, obsessed in how you win this war against Hamas, what you do in Hezbollah. But going forward, Israel is going to need to either stockpile more munitions or find alternate ways, so it is not quite as dependent upon the United States as its indispensable ally, but
Yes.
it's a two-way street, and Israel does help America in many ways, and people need to remember that.
So, Michael, back to you. A few things that I take from what Eric said. Israel should go back to be bipartisan because we should rely on both parties. B, President Biden is the last Zionist, as he says about himself, and after him, we don't know what's going to happen. And C, we must sign ASAP the new 10-year deal of U.S. support to Israel, because if we don't do it, we don't know what's going to happen.
Interesting. Okay. Let's take each one of those points separately. Will President Biden be the last Democratic pro-Israel president? It could well be. But we've even had Bernie Sanders come out in support of us during this crisis, because there are Democrats and probably even progressive Democrats. You know, Richie Torres in New York, in the Bronx. You can't get someone more pro-Israel than Richie Torres, and he's progressive, and he's black and Latino and gay, all that, and very, very pro-Israel, extraordinary individual. So we don't know. As for the future, the MOU, another signing an MOU, listen, I can put my cards on the table. I oppose the last MOU. I don't think it's the right kind of relationship we should have with the United States, and we are entirely too dependent militarily and strategically on the United States, and Eric Mandel is exactly right. Israel has to develop its own industries and has to develop alternative sources of munitions, because it gives the United States a tremendous amount of leverage over us. If tomorrow we have to go to war in the north, and the United States does not want us to go in the north, and those are the signs, all indications are that it doesn't want us to go, we're going to have a hard time coming up with a lot of artillery shells and a lot of air-to-ground missiles. That's going to be a big challenge. I've said, you know, if we have to throw rocks at Hezbollah, we'll throw rocks at Hezbollah, because we have no choice. We have to defend ourselves. But it's not realistic for the United States, an independent country, a superpower, far away from the Middle East, to have the same interests as the state of Israel. We're going to have an independence interest because we are a sovereign country and a Jewish state in the Middle East. And it's just, I think we should be moving in our relationship with the United States to a healthier basis, which is much more cooperative, rather than having one side being completely dependent on the other. We should be cooperating in cyber, in laser, and intelligence on a partnership basis. And I think that would be healthier.
And how can Israel do that? Because Israel, as you said, is nearly totally dependent on the U.S. when it comes to ammunition.
We can't do it. Right now, I can't do it.
It will take a decade.
It's going to take even more than a decade. Take more than a decade. Listen, there have been munitions that in 2006, we were using American cluster bombs. The United States didn't like it, so we started making our own cluster bombs. We know we can do it. And
yes,
believe me, those...
You can't manufacture F-35. It takes decades. It costs billions. And you're your own supplier.
Don't get me started about the F-35. I don't think we should have bought it to begin with. There are other planes out there that, by the way, cost half as much to maintain as an F-35. So we can move to unmanned aircraft, which is the best. The F-35 is the last manned aircraft, fighter aircraft probably in history. But it's true. It's going to take time. You know, if you would have asked the average Israeli on October 6th whether Israel could defend itself by itself against any Middle Eastern adversary, most Israelis would have said, of course we can. On October 7th, the same majority would have said, no, we can't. We really need those 2 aircraft carriers here. We're going to tell the aircraft carriers, okay, we got it. You can go home now. No one was willing to say that. October 7th proved that we do need the United States.
And you see today, they've intercepted, I don't know, 15, 20 different kinds of ammunition fired at us from Yemen by the Houthis. They've intercepted all of them.
But in the long run, I'm saying in the long run, for this war, we are dependent, and let's recognize that fact. But in the long run, a strategic goal for the state of Israel should be military independence from everybody, not just the United States.
Eric, back to you in New York. Maybe Prime Minister Netanyahu was wrong twice. First, for getting Secretary Blinken into the cabinet meeting as if the U.S. is a member of the Israeli cabinet, making us not independent enough, and B, for not at least showing that he's willing to deal with them or to talk to them about the day after the war in Gaza, seeming as, someone who's not interested in at least talking to the Americans, or at least paying attention to what concerns them.
Well, this sort of alludes to the possibility that was reported in the Wall Street Journal that Biden pressured Prime Minister Netanyahu not to preemptively strike Hezbollah, as some people thought, although many people also thought that Israel wanted to fight one war at a time. if the quid pro quo was not to preemptively attack Hezbollah, but to give Israel as many months as it needed in the south, then it was worthwhile. But I think Prime Minister Netanyahu, for whatever faults, is very smart and realizes that the relationship with President Biden is difficult. I do want to reiterate one thing Michael said, and I think he's absolutely right. As an American, I'm saying this, it is be a much healthier relationship if the next MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, is, if not the last, it's going to be something that is going to be drawn down. Remember, it used to be one that Israel could spend within its own defense industry, and now it 100% has to be spent within the United States. So it does help the American defense contractors. But a more balanced, healthier relationship, Israel to be independent. I can tell you one thing: when I come back to America, Americans, including very supportive Americans, have no idea what Israel is going through now. The 200,000 plus people displaced, the injured that I saw in Soroka Hospital, what's happened to the Israeli family, where you have one of Michael and I mutual friends. He has a fellow Yitzhak Sokolov. He has his daughter, his son, his son-in-law, his daughter-in-law, all in the army. The mother, another sister, taking care of all the children. Americans have no understanding of what's really going on in Israel and the burden that's going on and what's happening to the economy. And Israel is dependent upon the United States, but it needs to move in a more healthier direction. Michael is absolutely right.
So, Michael, back to my previous question, should Israel at least talk to the Americans about the day after and, ease a little bit tensions, because that concerns the most currently?
Well, let's speak very candidly. President Biden talked about a day after, which would be a two-state solution, and taking the Palestinian Authority that would be revamped and moving it into the Gaza Strip. And the Prime Minister, rather than just saying, hey, okay, we hear you, we'll talk about it in 2-3 years, sort of shot back at Biden and said, well, I'm not in my watch. It's not going to happen. There's not going to be a two-state solution. And the Palestinian Authority is as bad as Hamas. They just have a different way of trying to destroy us. And maybe all be true, but let's keep in mind that President Biden, for all of our reservations about his policy toward Iran and the perhaps criticisms he's heard about our bombing in Gaza last week, he said it was indiscriminate. The fact of the matter is, this man is standing pretty much alone in his party, pretty much alone vis-a-vis the world in opposing a ceasefire. And a ceasefire means Hamas wins. It means Hamas gets away with mass murder. It means we lose. So we're really dependent on this 81-year-old president who has a moral compass. I don't think you want to take pot shots at him. And I think that Netanyahu's remarks were not geared for Biden. They were geared for his own party. He's afraid that, that his own...
As Henry Kissinger, the late Henry Kissinger said, Israel doesn't have, international policy, but only domestic politics.
Well, America has a lot of domestic politics, too. It's funny, the great thing is that Biden's rising above it in many ways. That's to his very much his credit. He's not easy. I know I worked with years for him, and he used to always say, as my father said, never crucify yourself on a small cross, okay? He's crucifying himself on a very big cross. We are the cross. We're the cross. He's paying a big price for supporting us, and we should be appreciative of that.
And to listen to him. And when he said, don't on October 11th, he didn't only mean Hezbollah and Iran, he spoke to us.
Those aircraft carriers deter Iran and Hezbollah, but they also deterred us. They do, okay, because they don't have an interest in going to war and having a third punch. We understand that. We should be willing to discuss the day after, certainly. We should listen respectfully. We should do it quietly behind the scenes as much as possible. It's in our interest, too, to talk about the day after. Why not? But to get into a public spat with this president right now, I think is very imprudent.
And it's still done.
Shouldn't do it.
Eric, last remark regarding that, half a minute?
I think what I'd like to say is this war, if people in the United States think is a war between Israel and the Palestinians, it certainly is. But this is just a battle in a much greater war against radical Islamism. And if my country does not realize that our policy prescriptions are not going to be good in this region, we have to deal with Iran. Iran is a big part of everything that happens nefariously in this region.
We'll speak about that in our next meeting. Eric Mandel in New York, Michael Oren here with me in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. One final break, and when we return, we'll take you into the corridors of the secret IDF intelligence unit, named simply 504, and their unique line of work. Don't go anywhere.